bit bypassed my question, but you gave us a very good framework for thinking, so thank you very much for it. You also mentioned that there is a big gap in understanding what Russia is really in the minds of people in the Western countries, and there is a, you know, even the art is already responding to it. There is this Norwegian TV series which I mentioned to you, Okkupert. It is a fictitious scenario of Norway being occupied by Russia. So there is some reflection of the threat, but yes, long way, still very long way to go. Our last speaker, Professor Hedlund, what is, I think that really proper way to closing this first round of the panel will be, what is the reflection of Sweden, and if you can speak more broadly about Scandinavian countries, about the topics we discussed?
I think I will prefer to speak more broadly about this business about decolonization and Russia and Moscovia and all of that. And my argument is that this is a much more complicated issue than previous cases of decolonization. And when we approach this in a Western discourse, it often tends to lead us in the wrong direction because the frame of reference is totally wrong. I would argue that the case at hand is so extreme and so different from others that we really need to start doing some homework on what this Russia, Moscovia, Russian colonial imperialism is really about. And I'd like to start with when Ukrainians say that we should stop talking about Russia and start talking about Moscovia. There is an element of spite in that for obvious reasons, but it's much more than that. Because my argument would be that before Peter had himself pronounced emperor of all the Russias, there was no Russia. So Russia is a fairly recent addition to the states of the world. At that time, it was generally known as Muscovy. In Sweden, it was known as Moscoviet. Voltaire, in his great book about Charles XII, talked about La Moscovie. And the reason why this is important is that when the empire was created, it was after the Treaty of Pereyaslav, when Hetman Mazepa went with the Russians against Poland, which then was seen as the greater enemy than the Russians. Big historical mistake, I would argue, but anyway, it was the incorporation of the territories that would become Ukraine into Muscovy that laid the foundations for creating Russia. Before that, there was no Russia. So the logical argument is that now that Muscovy has lost Ukraine, it is Muscovy again, and Russia is destroyed. Because Russia is a conglomerate of Muscovy and Ukraine, and it cannot live without having the two together. I think this is extremely important to understand, because when the territories that would become Ukraine were incorporated, it started a historical self-understanding amongst the Muscovites that we are a 1,000-year civilization that started in Kiev on the banks of the Dnipro. It has been there for 1,000 years. It's held together by the Russian language and by Russian culture. And the seat is in Moscow. And the implication of this is that if we no longer control Kiev, Russia no longer exists. It's sort of the cultural heritage of Muscovy is in Kiev. And if Kiev is torn out, then the 1,000-year Reich no longer exists. And this explains why in the late imperial era, the imperial bureaucracy in Petersburg was not so much concerned about political separatism, but extremely concerned about cultural separatism. So there could be some sort of autonomy for people down the Mala Rossiya, the small little Russians, but no cultural separatism. That was extremely dangerous. Even a very liberal person like Struve, who was a member of the Cadet Party, said, I will we treated the Jews horribly. I would give freedom for Finland and freedom for Poland, but never Ukraine. It is unthinkable, because cultural separatism will kill Russia. And then all that will be left will be this rump state, Moscovia. And this is the trope that Putin has made his foreign and security policy mainstay, that there can be no Ukraine, because if there is Ukraine, there is no Russia. And this, to my mind, means that this is a war that is existential, not only for the Ukrainians, which is understandable. If Ukraine stops fighting, it stops existing. It's existential for the Russians as well, because if Russia does not win this war, Russia disappears. This means that those who adhere to this foreign policy trope that Putin hasn't invented, I mean, it's 19th century construction, but has made his own. Those who adhere to this, and that is now being hammered into the Russian population with effects that we can only speculate about, but it's being hammered in daily. Those who adhere to this will never accept any form of settlement that leaves Ukraine free. This means that the only way, in my mind, that this war can be brought to an end is by defeating the Muscovites. That's the only way that this can ever be brought to a conclusion. There can never be any negotiations, because neither side has anything to negotiate about. It's existential, it's a zero-sum game. You win, I lose. I win, you lose. There cannot be a settlement because there is nothing in between to discuss. Either Russia exists or Russia does not exist. If Russia exists, Ukraine does not exist. Okay? So this is why the reason why we really must give everything we can to Ukraine to defeat, not to defend itself against Russia, but to defeat Russia, is that this is the only way we can get back to peace in Europe. That's my very firm conviction.